Content warnings for this episode include dysphoria, mental health, and religion.
Genderful would like to acknowledge the indigenous peoples and the unceded lands that producers, hosts, and guests live and have dwelt upon. Today we honor the
Salish,
Ojibwa and Dakota lands. And our guest, please, Aaron, where are you from?
Caddo lands.
Thank you very much. We honor the elders, the human, the plant, and animal ancestors of these lands and celebrate the living descendants of these peoples. May all beings tend these lands for the goodness of the next 7 generations and beyond.
Meowdy folks, welcome to Genderful, a talk show interviewing gender-diverse folks about their special interests.
The name of our show celebrates that gender expansiveness is wonderful.
Hi, I'm GenderMeowster, and my pronouns are they, them.
Hi, I'm Atlas of Phoenix, and my pronouns are also they, them. The focus of our show is to interview trans, non-binary, agender, and gender-diverse people regarding their special interests, passion projects, and resources for the gender-diverse community.
We want our audience to know that this show is hosted by 2 folks who also identify as non-binary, transmasculine, neurodivergent, and disabled, with the passion for telling trans stories.
We invite you to remember that we are whole people with robust lives, friendships, challenges, and successes. We love and are loved, and we are delighted to share these stories with you.
As always, we kindly remind our listeners that no person is a monolith of their identities. Your identities can change over time and are valid every step of the way. And if you think you're gender diverse, you are gender diverse. There are no social or medical prerequisites to be included in the community. Welcome to Genderful episode 84. This week, our guest Aaron Embrey, he, they pronouns, is chatting with us about gender, spirituality, and creativity. Aaron was the original owner of genderful.com domain name, and that's how we met. They no longer own it, but that's how we found each other. And by serendipity, this has actually created a really awesome opportunity for connection between all 3 of us, honestly. I'm
awesome.
so excited. So
It's
welcome
like
to Genderful, Aaron. I'm so
Thank
glad you're here.
you. I'm so glad to be here. It feels like serendipity.
Totally.
A little bit. It was meant to be. So I'm really excited to be here and really excited to connect with both of y'all and be connected with everything you're creating here at Genderful. I love it. I love this vision that you've created and that you're this platform that you've created. It's amazing. So thank you.
Thank you. So we have a couple questions that we like to ask all of our guests before we dive into the topic of the day. I do eventually want to ask you about how you came up with Genderful yourself, but we'll get there in a minute. So what are some things that you can trace back to your youth that indicated you might be gender diverse or trans one day?
I feel my story in a lot of ways is similar to a lot of stories around, that dysphoric feeling. Before I knew that there was a word called dysphoria, it was a discomfort in my body. And there was definitely, I was drawn to boy things. And if that were just in and of itself, the only thing, but that wasn't the only thing. I could see people that I was told were supposed to be like me, and I tried to connect with those people that I was told I'm one of these people. Like I'm a little tomboy, all those labels that I was given as a child, as a child that was assigned female at birth. I had. I really leaned into my tomboy label, but it never, I could see other tomboys around me, and I knew that was not it for me. But at that time, I grew up in the early 80s, in a time and in a place where these conversations just weren't happening then. And so I just had to put it together that my labels were not quite what I was being told that they were. I just had that internal feeling. So it definitely came down to my interests, and it was definitely a deep feeling within my body, within my skin of realizing that the labels just did not seem to apply to me. So, um, it was really easy until puberty because I could just be a tomboy and I could just love the things that I loved and not have to feel like they had to have a category or that I was playing in a sandbox that was not meant for me. So, uh, yeah, I look back now because of the world that I grew up in, where we didn't have the language, we didn't have the understanding that has thankfully evolved, over time. Thankfully, we do have language that is accessible now, or, at least more so. Um, and so I feel like my development in some ways was sort of delayed because I didn't have access to that language at a time when I was trying to categorize myself. And so it was an interesting time. I really feel like I just leaned really into that tomboy label and I just owned it. Until I couldn't own it anymore. And then when puberty hit, it became a whole new challenge for me. But in very early life, I felt really comfortable just being a tomboy because it worked, or at least it worked for me at the time. I feel like I could still express a part of my truth as much as I could understand it and like create a framework for it.
Mm-hmm.
Whatever sort of framework it was, in like super conservative East Texas in the 80s. It was just a different time for sure. So,
well, I can tell you the Texans in the chat are about to get real excited about you mentioning Texas. We have a couple of trans Texas people here today.
Howdy,
Happy
neighbors.
Texas Day.
I don't know if that answers the question or not, but
I think it was a great answer. I think it was a wonderful answer. They're saying meowdy. The Texan transes are saying meowdy.
Meowdy.
We'll even have an emote about it.
Okay, Aaron, this question is for you. How has your relationship to gender evolved over time?
That's a great question. I feel like because of those early years of really feeling in resistance to my femininity, I really pushed against it for so many years. And then it seemed like the older I got without having the language, I became really resentful towards my femininity. And because it seemed like that's all that people could see was my femininity. And then as I started identifying more gender queer, that was the word I identified as like a butch lesbian back in the, like that was my identity, but it was always like leaning into the masculine. And so I feel like the younger years were really focused on resisting the parts of me that were feminine. And then I was really embracing my masculinity for most of my early life. And then I finally reached a point where I could begin a physical medical transition and my whole perspective on my gender started to shift as I transitioned and became more comfortable and seen in my masculine body. I was able to then embrace my femininity in a way that I could never do before transition. So I feel like an equilibrium has happened over the years of being like really in resistance to my feminine specs, and then having, years of sort of that battle with my femininity, and then starting a transition in every sense of that word, that really kind of brought some balance. Not only, I think once my masculinity was seen outwardly, I could then accept my femininity inwardly in a way that was not possible before. And so it really brought, I feel like I have a greater acceptance of the totality of me as a feminine energy and a masculine energy that, I contain multitudes. And I feel like I have reached a place of acceptance with that finally, after all those years of battle, of battling and resisting one part of me. And now I feel like I finally, it is fluid. So some days I still find myself in resistance to those parts of myself that, depending on how I'm being perceived in the outside world. But yeah, I feel like I've just been able to, over the years, finally be able to accept uh, myself as a more holistic, masculine and feminine being, I suppose. So
Our journeys are similar in that way. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like I started thinking of gender in a bigger way, that it was not just about my outward appearance and how others perceived me. I was able to sort of perceive and define myself in a more expansive way. And I feel like that I was limiting myself for so many years and saying, well, I have to fit into this box, or I have to fit into this box. And, it was a struggle of trying to fit into these boxes that were predefined for me. And I think as we've developed this language and its realization that it is not a binary, right? It is this beautiful spectrum of possibilities. And I feel like that we all embody like a unique blend of those two energies. And that's really what, to me, what gender is now, is like how those two energies of masculinity and femininity are expressed at any given time. And some days it's on one point of the spectrum, and some days it's on a different point of this perspective on the spectrum. But I think if I can accept myself more fluidly now than I could ever before I had this experience of transition, because I was so stuck in those boxes, those binary boxes of trying to find a place to fit within those predefined boxes that just don't exist for me now. Like I've eliminated those boxes, and or at least I feel like I'm in a constant process of eliminating those boxes for myself.
Right. I think we had a guest, wonderful Phelan, who has a YouTube channel called Queer to Help. And we were talking, they were also talking about boxes too. And I kind of made a funny quip, and I was just like, boxes are for shoes. And then without really thinking about it, I said, free the souls.
Yes.
And now when I think about it, I feel like it's not it's not feet, it's not soles of feet or shoes or whatever. It's our souls, like free our souls from these little crappy boxes that
so true
were designed a long time ago for marketing purposes.
So true.
I'm wearing blue, and I'm gonna wear here's pink. You like pink? Here's pink. They're just colors and stuff, and it's just so
true.
Weird.
It is. I was obsessed with having a blue boys BMX bike when I was a kid, because it was blue and it was a boys bike, and it was a BMX bike, and so even then I was like stuck in that box because it had to be blue, it had to be a boys bike. But that was the only outlet I had to express my gender, was like the color of my bike.
Oh wow!
Back then.
I think my version of a BMX bike, which I hope they still make today, because this is a sweet bike, the Sweet Patootie bike, and it was called Sweet Thunder, and it had like this big patootie seat that was like this huge, and it was cushy, and it was Pepto-Bismol pink. And I was like, yeah, this is tough. Like, it was a tough girl's bike. Like, it was a BMX bike, but it was a tough BMX bike.
That's right.
And so and it had like tassels and stuff, but I did mine because the tassels were sparkly, and I still like sparkly things. And so so that's great. And now we get to switch topics and talk about, how did you come up with Genderful, and what was it?
It's actually related to the whole concept of like these blending of, I thought of the word colorful and beautiful and being full of gender, but not just one box or the other. I mean, I was really thinking of gender in terms of a color spectrum, and like if we were to like each have this unique color gradient to represent our genders instead of like language, how different. And I started thinking about the concept of gender as sort of like these unique spectrums of color. And, it was really about the idea of expanding beyond the binary boxes that we'd always used to sort of talk about gender. And I felt like I was able to understand my own gender in a deeper, more complete way when I could visualize it as like the blending of these colors. And that's how you get these unique expressions of gender, right? Is, maybe I have more pink in this area. And the original Genderful logo was this sort of this gradient, blue to pink, purple gradient that sort of encompassed multiple points on the binary, I guess. I mean, I'm a very visual person. I'm an artist. I'm a graphic designer. So it's sometimes easier to talk in pictures or in abstract colors than it is to find words to describe something. And
Yeah.
so Genderful, I wanted it to be about my unique expression of gender. So it was a blog, but then I realized that if it's truly going to be genderful, it has to be a platform, an outlet to have conversations with other people. And so I did a few interviews at the time, mostly with other transmasculine people. Actually, it was only transmasculine people at the beginning. I had plans to I wanted to talk to a whole spectrum of gender expressions and identities, and very similar to what you're doing now with Genderful. I mean, I realized that if it was going to be truly a genderful platform, it had to have a lot of voices. And so I'm so glad that you have the organization and the follow through to be able to create this amazing platform and capture all of these amazingly diverse voices within that are genderfully diverse as well, and diverse in the work that people are doing and in their own unique expressions of gender. And I think that's how people, I don't know, I feel like the more that we can show how gender is not binary, the more we can understand that gender is not binary. And I guess that was my whole point in originally coming up with the name and Genderful and the concept of having these diverse conversations. So I'm super pumped that it's happening, even though I fell short on my vision for the project.
That's amazing. I don't know if you fell short. I mean, it's happening. And this is a good segue to talk to Gender about how they came up with it too. Do you want to pitch in here?
Yeah, I'd love to. So the first time I heard the phrase genderful, it was actually one of the first trans men I'd ever met and I knew was a trans man, because chances are I met plenty of trans men before I'd realized what was happening. But it was the first trans man who was like my friend, and I was pre-transition. I was still using my dead name. It was before I transitioned socially about 4 or 5 years before I transitioned medically. And so, but it was before that. So this must have been 7, 8, 9 years ago now. Actually, no, yeah, it was about 8, 9, 10 years ago. I was in seminary, and it was in Berkeley, California. So it was like the queerest seminary I could find. There's 50 people in the incoming class, and 48 of us were queer or trans or both or something else. We were all, in the rainbow family. Majority of the staff that worked there were also queer and or trans. And so I was in seminary, but it was not what people think when you hear the word seminary, right? It was like super gay.
Best seminary ever.
Yeah, it was
Best seminary ever.
It was really
Yes.
great. It was really great. Well, and I went there because I was trying to heal the wounds between spirituality and gender and sexuality. Like I majored in religion in undergrad, comparative religion, and I minored in gender studies and theater. So that's the kind of queer spiritual being that I was at that moment. I would say religion was really I don't know if hyperfocus is the right word. It was a special topic. Like I went real deep. I changed the degree I was going to get 5 times before I graduated, which looking at it now, I'm like, wow, I've had ADHD for a long time. And I've had autism for a long time, because it's of course, it's just sort of, you always have had it. But so this is getting to be a long story. But so I was in seminary, and Elijah, my friend who was trans, I actually drove him to his top surgery. I had the opportunity to drive him. His partner took care of him in the early recovery, but I got to help a little bit in the afterwards as well. And so some of my very first experiences with someone who is physically transitioning was with this wonderful trans man, Elijah. And one day in seminary, we were talking about God, and he said, God is genderful. And we were I think we were both together in this trans spirituality class. It was specifically about the ways that you can read trans subtext, or not even subtext, just trans people in the Bible. Like the woman at the well and all this stuff. There's all these little pieces and details around that. That's that was a trans woman at the well. That's why she was there at the time she was there, and all this stuff. And so it was such a beautiful time to be like in school trying to like heal my spirit and my soul from like this terrible shit that went down. I cussed, haha. Back. That's my one cuss. I spent our cuss. I'm sorry, everyone.
God, I
That
was
went
gonna
down
cuss.
in undergrad. Now you can only say patootie, Atlas.
Dang it!
I
I
spent
even
our-
enjoy saying patootie now. I'm leaving. Good night.
Fancy.
So it was just this really like poignant time to be figuring that out, because in undergrad I was super involved with like different Christian things, and now I'm pagan, like, you know.
Wow. That's a
Like it's been an
transition.
adventure. Yeah, it was a transition. So I'm absolutely not using that degree, except for the ways that I am. So I was studying to be a chaplain, which is someone who like sits and holds space, especially in the hard times, in those hard moments, and like has hopefulness and room for grief. And I feel like the kind of like activism that I do in the trans community, like helping people raise money for their surgeries and like being with people in the feelings about what's happening politically in the States, especially right now, like I feel like I'm using those chaplaincy skills, even though I'm not like a formal chaplain TM who's like getting paid to be a chaplain somewhere officially. So I still use the skill sets. And
Absolutely.
you know, I think of Elijah when I think about how God is genderful, because it's about like expanding your definition of the divine and having like gender diversity be divine instead of profane, having our gender diversity be sacred. So I know this was a really long explanation, but I wanted to get to that part where it's like, you know, I was able to operate at the time in this like Christian spiritual paradigm where the divine was sacred and trans bodies are sacred.
Mm.
And like taking Elijah to that surgery was a sacred act, right? And so it was so powerful to hear that perspective from him going through that process at that time, through the lens that we were both operating from. I'm pretty sure he's a pastor now. I've
Wow.
actually asked him to be on the show and we never figured out scheduling him, but anyway, we'll try again maybe. So yeah, so that's where it came from, was from Elijah in seminary, because it's like gender wonderful.
Absolutely. That's
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah.
I love thank you
Alright.
so much for sharing that story. I was curious how it came through you, this amazing word and ideal about shifting that narrative and thoughts about trans people, because it is amazing to me, and I do find trans people, gender non-conforming people, to be extremely spiritually deep people. There is a certain knowing, or there's a certain peace, I feel like spiritual peace, that I see a lot in the trans community. And it is interesting, as especially I have become more comfortable spiritually and physically. It is interesting to think about trans as being a sacred, that transition in thinking of, I was raised to think, to believe that people were made in God's image, and I could never really like feel that until after I transitioned. And if God is genderful and I am genderful, I could actually see myself as like, using that old Christian language of like a child of God that I never could feel or connect with as a kid. I could never feel that connection until I was able to embody my own genderfulness. And then I was like, oh, maybe I was made in the image and likeness of God.
Yeah.
Well, that's
So-
kind of like where I come from. Like, my hypothesis about gender identity is that we're here to teach people how to love,
Mm,
and that's really our goal, is to show people that it's important to love the soul and not the body.
mm,
It's important to praise the body, but it's more important to love the soul, because you never know, like past lives, if you're going to reconnect again in a future life, and you'll find each other. And so I think that our It's deep. I think it's like the crucifixion of our bodies on this planet during this time as we're becoming more and more of an active force and visible in a way that our elders were not. Um, there's a purpose for us, and it's natural, it's nature, and what we're doing with our bodies, be it HRT, our surgeries, are just our minds. If we can't do HRT, we can't afford the surgeries, but we just simply say, we are trans, we are non-binary. I feel like we are the embodiment of God in that way, because I feel everyone was born non-binary, but because of certain systems in place, oh, you've got a boy because of this thing, and then you've got a girl because of this thing. And it's not simplified like that. It's actually simpler than that.
Right.
And they complicate it with binary.
Yes.
People need a binary to know where they're at. So the binary is less about us and more about that individual. And there's no place for binaries in living life.
Love that.
That's my take
So
on that.
true. I
Also,
love.
I came up with 2 great bumper stickers that I'd like to talk to Elijah about. One of them is a pride sticker that says "Best Seminary Ever," and then the other is a bumper sticker that says "God is genderful Elijah." So I'm working on these, and I'll have them up, and the proceeds will go to help folks, because I'm not just going to capitalize and be like, so it's just like, like gonna help people. So anyway,
Love
that's
that.
just an idea. We'll talk later. Okay, the next question is,
I love that idea.
how has the way you were raised as a closed-closeted conservative Christian Texan most impacted your current path as an expansive, open, queer, trans person? Not expensive, just expansive.
You know, I feel like I sort of touched on this already a little bit, but that I grew up really constricted into those boxes, and I feel like it just never felt like it fit. And so, because of that awareness that I had really early, that I was not that. Like, I was really hyper aware of not fitting into those boxes. And I feel like because of that constriction that I had, and that like closeted, closed, tight, like hidden decades of my youth, there was only one way for me to move from that. Like, I either had to like break out of that limited, closed mindset, um, or I could see the other path. It was not good. It was not good for me. It was not a good path. If I didn't expand, like if I just continued to contract, I was going to just, dissolve into myself, into nothing. And yeah, so I felt like that was my only option, was to expand beyond that thinking, and to like, and I feel like because I didn't feel there was a place for me in organized religion, I feel like I was really clear on that early on, before I even had a full understanding of who I was as my own identity. I still felt like organized religion did not have a place for me. I didn't feel welcome there. I didn't feel like it was for me. So it set me off on a path of seeking that personal relationship with the divine elsewhere. And so I feel like I had to think outside of those boxes, and I spent so many years like in such intense struggle, because I felt like that was the only option. And if I didn't find my place within religion, like I was broken. There was something wrong with me. I took it really personally that that organized religion was supposed to be the only way. And that was my belief as a child, as a young adult, even into like, into my 20s. I feel like that was ingrained. I was groomed to believe that this was the only way to have any sort of relationship with God, or with the creator, with the universe. My language has expanded also since then, because I felt like then it had to be this way, but that way there was no place for me. And so it was really like I couldn't reconcile my Christian upbringing with my very existence. And so it was like an unstoppable force meeting an unmovable object. And that created a lot of suffering, in early life, because I couldn't reconcile my own existence with with my, the religious beliefs that I had, that had that was ingrained in me. Um, and so I had to expand beyond that to survive it. and so I feel like that is what happened, is like I eventually was able to believe something new and transition into a whole new belief system that I that fit, that made me feel like, I was not broken, that I wasn't a mistake, that I actually had some sort of divine purpose, like you, Atlas, and I was able to shift my thinking from this really limited, broken place to this more expansive, like, oh, you know what? Maybe religion isn't all there is, and maybe there's another path, and maybe there's another way of being and believing, and finding myself within that new way of thinking about the world. So that was a long-winded answer.
No, it wasn't.
Okay,
It was
we're here.
beautiful.
We're here for long answers.
Yes.
I don't think it was negative.
I don't think so either. I don't think it was long-winded. I think it was a nice, beautiful, long explanation into something that's incredibly complicated.
That's true. It's still hard to find words sometimes, and I still
It's
bump
so
up
hard.
against those old belief systems that want to like encroach and like keep me small.
Right. I mean, I wasn't raised, my grandmother was a German Jewish woman who was killed in the war, but like we didn't practice religion in my home. My mother was adopted in France and raised by a Catholic woman and her husband, who were abusive to her. And then my father became an atheist after his mother passed away. She had cancer when he was 13. And so we never practiced it. I went to a couple different churches just to check things out. And it just seemed like you have to go someplace on Sunday and possibly Wednesday. And then sometimes people pass out in the aisles. And I thought, is this what religion is? And then it was like, your conversation with God immediately begins as soon as you wake up in the morning until you go to bed at night. And then you have this private conversation while you're asleep. And then you get these dreams and revelations if you choose to see it that way. And there's symbols everywhere, whether it's a color or a series of numbers. Um, like you're constantly in communication with the divine. And I feel like for me, the word God has so many connotations to it, that I do prefer the word divine source, divine creator, and that you're a co-creator in your destiny. And so that you get to show up and participate. And I think that's it. And I feel like that's why I'm thinking about going into transcendental meditation, because I want to be able to open these avenues, these channels more, and be ready to receive. And it sounds like this is exactly the expansive part of your journey, has been to make the decision to listen to yourself more than what anyone else is saying around you, which at the end of the day, is so incredibly valuable that there's no price you can put on that. That kind of self-resilience to channel and to listen, like to really just listen.
Right.
That's what it sounds like you've been doing all of these years.
Yeah.
The BMX to where you are now is there's been a series of sessions where you've listened to yourself, and this is where you are now.
So true.
So it makes sense that you would come up with the name Genderful, and it would make sense that as a collective conscious that gender would also come up with this, and the same ideas, almost exactly duplicate. It seems like there's a split soul between you, and that's what's beautiful about having you both on the show today.
Yeah. And that is an interesting segue into and I feel like spirituality and creativity are these two threads that are woven throughout my work now that I've stepped away from my corporate job and I'm doing my own thing in the world. And I feel freer to incorporate, spirituality was something I feel like I had to hide for a lot of my years because, I had my own internalized shame that sprouted from religious beliefs. I had internalized homophobia, I had internalized transphobia, all of that trauma from this thing that is supposed to be love. And now, that I've leaving those old beliefs behind, and creating something new. And it is so fascinating how creativity, I feel like ideas are available to us. And, if we are open to um, following those creative urges that we all get, Gender had a creative urge to follow their idea around Genderful, and I had a similar creative urge. And I feel like, we all have ideas that come to us, and sometimes we catch those ideas and
Right.
and create something of beautiful around those ideas, something that'll be a valuable value to other people. Um, and it is about trusting yourself to follow that internal guidance. That is a constant practice for me, is learning to be better about listening to what is myself, what is coming from myself, and what is just the noise from all of that conditioning that I was raised in. And it's just been a process of teasing out what is mine and what is not mine. And I feel like that is a lot of what my creative process is like getting better at listening to myself and my own internal guidance, and trusting that, like you were saying, Atlas,
Like
learning
really
to trust
trusting
it.
yourself.
True. So that's it. That's
Yeah,
really
it's
it.
like really, really learning to trust yourself. It's like I've made it this far, in 52, and it's just like I'm learning to trust myself a lot in the last 3 years. And enough to say, I just need to take a break from folks right now for 6 months and work on myself and know that my relationships are solid enough where I can walk away and do this.
Right.
But here's a really good question to kind of piggyback off of what you were saying, which is, how has your personal perspective of spirituality and our creativity evolved alongside the fluidity of your gender/identity? Do you want me to ask again?
Yeah, maybe one more time.
Sure. How has your personal perspective of spirituality and or creativity evolved alongside the fluidity of your gender and identity? So
Yeah.
it's your perspective of spirituality and our creativity and the
Yeah.
evolution.
Yes. I do think that I think of my creative process much more in terms of masculine energy and feminine energy now. I had always thought of the creative process like breathing, like there's an in breath with the creative process, and then there's an out breath. And then, which is, breathing has been like the apex of my spiritual practice, learning to breathe in a more conscious, like focused way. And I feel like that is also happening in my creative process, is creating in a more conscious, focused, deliberate way, and thinking about the creative process in terms of that masculine and feminine energy. That there is like a receptive intake process, and then there's a pause, and that the pause, the rest, is part of the creative process as well. Like it's not
Right.
just breathing out constantly. And for a long time, when I was in my corporate job, I was just constantly like exhale, exhale. I was never taking a moment to like inhale or to pause or rest. And so I feel like as I've started shifting the way I think about gender, as being like these two energies that exist within me, in various, amounts or degrees, or however you want to categorize that. I also think about my creative process. Like there is like this feminine energy, and then there's a masculine energy that is more about the focused energy of doing something versus this receptive energy of being open to listening to that internal creative urge. And then also remembering to just rest and not constantly be working. Um, and so I do feel like I've evolved my creative process alongside my whole understanding of my spirituality and my gender. They're very connected. And so they are these three threads that I'm weaving into my work now. I feel more freedom to be able to weave them into my professional work now. So yeah, I
It's a
love
beautiful experience.
it's my three favorite threads in my life. I think because now I can uh, think about them or experience them in a more expansive way. So that include both that feminine and the masculine side, and the pauses in between. pause. I feel like I realize the value of rest in the creative process, that it can't just always be about producing things in production for me, because
Yeah.
because I don't work my patterns, and I think I am much more aware of the patterns of my natural patterns of working and my natural um, rhythm of work is something that I was never really aware of before, and now I feel like rhythm is a really, and again, it's just about becoming more aware of what wants to come through me and when, and
Mm.
listening to that. And so I couldn't do this when I had my corporate job. I could not
Yeah.
feel free to experiment with the timing of the way my body wants to work, or the way I want to have a creative process.
Right.
I didn't feel free. I had to work on their time and on their
Right.
deadlines. And I think having some freedom and flexibility in my day has allowed me to observe those natural patterns in the way I work
Yeah.
in a new
What do
way.
you notice about your patterns? Like, are you more of a night owl? I know I'm a night owl.
I used to be a night owl, but I
Yeah.
think as I started valuing rest and work, rest
Mhm.
in my work,
Hmm.
it also um, around the time I had like this early in my physical medical transition, I had this sort of spiritual awakening where I had this understanding of myself as something greater than these binary boxes. And I was introduced to human design at that time, which is now is like
Mm.
this like, big thing. But at the time when I first learned about human design, it was like I had never heard of it. And this was probably 10 years ago. And it just gave me another tool, kind of like Myers-Briggs, kind of like Enneagram. There are so many tools that help you kind of have a deeper understanding of yourself on these different levels. And um, they kind of aligned with how I already felt about my own energy, that I wasn't like a machine that ran constantly. And I could see all these hustlers, like people who are just hustling in their work, these creative, amazing creators. And my body does not work like that. And so
Right.
I found that, through human design, it gave me a set of language that kind of helped me see myself um,
Can I just stop you
as,
for just
oh,
a
sure,
single
yeah,
second?
go ahead.
Can you define what human design is? Because some people might not know.
Yeah, it is
Yeah.
sort of this like synthesis of astrology, Kabbalah, quantum physics. It's sort of this melting pot of different modalities. And it was channeled, and it is it's a bit overwhelming when you first find your chart. There's tons of websites where you can run free charts and get your human design chart. But it really spoke to me as like, with the spiritual religious background that I had, it spoke to
Mhm.
me and as a graphic designer, I was like, what do you mean human design? Of course. And so it sort of clicked, like, if I have this belief system that we are created from, intentionally, or that I was intentionally created as a trans person, human design really supports that. We all have these really hyper unique configurations. And, it's also about like channels of energy and how energy runs through your body. The chart gives you sort of a roadmap to your DNA. And it's been a really helpful tool for me personally, to think about myself uh, according to a different sort of framework. And so it just gave me a different way of talking about my energy for creativity, or just for life, and just how my body is designed um, to function in the world. And so it really spoke to me, and it's given me a framework and language to be able to speak, not only to understand myself, but also to help me connect with clients on a different level and understand their unique design, because we're all so unique, and human design actually is able to. And then when you layer over human design, if you layer Enneagram, if you layer astrology, if you layer all of these other ways that we have
Mhm.
of our, Myers-Briggs, all of these
Mhm.
other ways of categorizing and labeling ourselves.
Mhm.
If we just look at one of our labels, I mean, that's very limiting. But if
Right.
we can like create this culmination of all of these labels, it's helped me like
Mhm.
have this whole set of a whole new vocabulary for being able
Well,
to.
I feel like it's really important for me to recognize that I am a cosmology of
Mm,
different types of things, and about 20 years ago, I was reading a book by an African author who recently passed away. I actually reached out to his wife to figure out how to reconcile my Jewish ancestry with my Islamic ancestry. And she taught me how to build an altar. And this book is called The Healing Wisdom of Africa, where he talks about the cosmology of the country Burkina Faso. And I actually made a piece of art kind of inspired by what I was reading. And it was a really beautiful book. And it's less about being from a particular place on the planet and more about your existence as a human being and the mechanics of how you specifically work, you know. And then there are countries in Africa where trans people are looked to as a guiding force for that particular village, that particular community. So it's not like it's, you know, everyone just doesn't like us. It's that there are things about themselves they don't like, and it comes out sometimes rather fatally. And so it's up to us to kind of figure out as individuals what really works for us and stop going by the herd mentality. And that also is about our particular demographic of folks too, because there can be people that are like following into that thing of like herd mentality. Well, I just want to be trans, and they don't really know why, but maybe they're doing it because their friends doing it or some other like mentality, like herd mentality thing. And we have to hold space for those folks too, because they're just still trying to figure themselves out. And it's no different than how we're trying to figure ourselves out.
So true.
And so it's holding space for, what is it? Holding space for grief and hope. You know, there are a lot of people that are grieving right now, and it's folks like us that are here to hold hope as well as the space for their grief and ours as well.
Yeah.
We gotta take care of ourselves first, though.
So true. But I do feel like I have this image a lot as people feel like we're sort of bridging. We're bridging a lot of binary ideas. It's like trans people can build these bridges between these opposing ideas, or people who feel like they're opposing ideas or ideals, and like that it doesn't have to be this either or, that there's this and that's happening in this bridge building between you know, between binaries and a lot of worlds. So
I feel like the word and bridge, these two words in this particular conversation and in our internal conversations and in conversations with those that we love and care about, like these two words really come up to one word, which is freedom. And we can incorporate and incorporate bridges and see each other as coming to a midpoint in the bridge with our own stuff that we're bringing to it, the good, bad, ugly, beautiful. Then we can start to see more of like I'm learning a lot about myself listening to you talk and realizing, oh, there are certain points of our journey as trans mask folks that kind of cross over. And so shows like this are really important, and not just for our community specifically, but sometimes, you know, that person that's just very confused and wants to watch the show to learn that, yeah, we're just human beings and we don't think we're better than other people, but we do value our lives. And you should consider doing the same thing too, because whether you realize it or not, like for me as personally, I value your life whether you hate me or not, because you're a human being and you're here for whatever time you have, for whatever lessons you need to learn. Because my whole thing is that whatever we're doing now is for a greater purpose that extends beyond our bodies here. It's this insular kind of spirit soul thing that goes back with the information it gathers every time it comes back to this planet. And at some point in time, you reach that last incarnation of being here, and you take everything back wherever your spirit is supposed to go to. My little feeling is that it goes through the black holes, but you know, it's the only thing that could go through the black holes. But that's another episode.
I love that. Love that.
They got it. I mean, the holes are for some reason, aren't they?
Exactly. Who knows?
Well, I just want to interrupt for just a second. You may notice that Gender and I are wearing very similar shirts, and that's because we're wearing identical shirts from Dapper Boy. We just want to give a touch out to Dapper Boy. They wrote me up for Trans Day of Visibility. And so
Oh, they did?
Yes.
This year or last year?
This year. It's so goofy.
Again?
Yes.
Wow, that's cool.
It's grossly fantastic. I don't know how to describe it. So we're wearing Dapper Boy shirts because we're Dapper Boys. And we wore shorts. All of us are wearing short sleeve shirts because we're just cool like that. So anyway, we have this important question that I'm not going to ask because I've asked all the questions. So Ginger's going to ask this question. How about that? Are you ready? Do you want me to ask it?
I sure hope so. I feel like this question's vague, and if you don't have an answer, that's okay.
Okay.
But I'm going to ask it anyways. How did your unique path bring you to these intersections of gender and spirituality and creativity?
Yeah, I feel like I've talked a lot about the spiritual aspect of that. I obviously, my awareness of myself as a spiritual person is something I've always had. I just did not know where I fit in the grand scheme of this divine plan. And so I feel like a lot of my life has been navigating that and finding my own path along that thread. And same with gender. And they've all, for a long time, they felt like separate paths, like they felt like they could not coexist. And I feel like that is what I'm doing now very intentionally, is weaving these paths together that always felt like they couldn't exist together. My creative work, I had this long professional career in corporate America, over 20 years of working in a place where I felt like I couldn't speak about my uniqueness in gender, and I could not speak about my uniqueness in my spiritual beliefs. It felt like all of these things had to exist really separately. And now I feel like I'm sort of bringing them together in my work now. And creativity, that is, maybe the hardest transition of all has been navigating my work in the world and letting go of all those old corporate ways of working that were really about exhaling all day long and creating the space for inhaling and breathing and pausing and resting in my work. And so that is a hard question, other than, sort of what I have been talking about already is sort of like the merging of these ideas that always felt like they couldn't coexist. And I wasn't allowed to be this thing and this thing. Like I couldn't possibly be a spiritual trans person. And why wouldn't, I am a human being, of course. And I feel like that is one reason why these conversations are important. It's just people can see us as human beings, and people who don't already see us as human beings or think of us as something other than a human being. I have a hard time wrapping my mind around the discord sometimes, but I feel like it's becoming overwhelming to me in my work that these discordant pieces of me have got to be woven more tightly together, or at least merge somewhat. And I feel like that's what I'm creating now, is sort of the merging of these things. And on some websites, I feel like it's heavy on my creative work, and some website, I feel like Genderful, when I first created it, was really heavy on my spiritual and sort of that path of seeking. And I feel like now that is Trans Manifesto. It's evolved and it's become something else. So Trans Manifesto sort of represents the spiritual heavy side of my work, but there's also threads of creativity and gender obviously in there. Obviously it's a lot about gender, but then my Aaron Embrey, my main website, is more about my creative work because that's where it kind of started off. But I'm starting to weave in these threads of spirituality and gender. And some of it's my own comfort level in being out, because I still live in East Texas, and there's still aspects of my life where I feel really stealth. I teach at my local community college, one class, and I'm out on social media, but I'm not necessarily always out in the classroom. And so that's something that I'm, navigating and finding my own. And I want that to change. I feel like that is a transition that I'm making now in my work, is even bringing it into that, the academic side of the work that I'm doing as well. And so it's just like finding comfort and safety in expressing these new aspects of myself, or not new to me, but new maybe to people who've been following what I'm creating. So another lengthy answer, but hopefully it did answer.
Great. Ginger, did you want to comment on trans and spirituality?
Yeah. I feel like at least when I was coming out, Aaron, like when I came out as trans, all my queer friends were like, yes, we knew. But then there was like this underlying piece of like, but I'm still spiritual. And so it's almost like being in the closet about spirituality in queer communities. And then like, I'm no longer in spiritual communities that I need to be in the closet about my gender or sexuality. But at the time and when I started, I was.
Right.
And so I've just, as I've been listening to you talk, I've been thinking about this like, I don't know if intersection is the right word, but this piece where, like for people who are bisexual, like they get flack from both sides, from straight and gay people, about how they're not that, and
Right.
because they're standing in between,
Right.
they're standing in the yes and so it's interesting being gender diverse, LGBTQ, queer, and spiritual in some flavor, because there's so much like harm and trauma that has come from a majority, not all, but a majority of organized religion, especially religions of the book in particular, to the queer community, that it's really interesting to stand in that in between, in sort of a very bisexual way, right? A very like, yes, and I'm not giving up either, I'm going to be in both kind of way. And there's also something to me that's really sacred and beautiful about being that kind of edge walker. And I think I've spoken of this mentor before, but one of my favorite mentors when I was in seminary was both a pagan witch and a United Church of Christ pastor. And so she would post on her social media about the high holidays of both religions, because she was both. She practiced both.
Wow.
And she was also polyamorous. She was a little bit less loud about that. She didn't hide it, but it wasn't like at the forefront. But when she passed away, there's this beautiful Facebook group that was put together that was just like remembering and then her name. And even now, years after she's passed away, we as a community are still engaging in that sort of intersectional, cross-cultural celebration of these different paradigms, these different spiritual paradigms, these different values. And like, in the way that she would write these posts, she was very aware of like, I'm in the Northern Hemisphere and the wheel of the year is different here versus in the South. And so when we celebrate Samhain here, they're celebrating Beltane in the Southern Hemisphere. So it's our death ritual. It's their like fertility ritual on the same day, just a different time zone, different, because the seasons are reversed. And so there were so many ways that because she was an edge walker, she brought in like all of these communities and perspectives together, and sat in that, like you called it discord, sat in that like smash up of different paradigms concurrently and just coexisted with them all at the same time. And one of my goals in my life is to live my life like she lived hers, and to be that kind of intersectional edge walker, pulling in and calling in the different peoples and communities to greater understanding of one another.
That's powerful work.
Yeah.
Really.
That's light walker work.
Really wonderful.
Yeah, I love that word, edgewalker. I love that description.
Yeah,
That's what it feels like.
fantastic. What are some examples of the non-outward or non-aesthetic things that satisfy your gender expression?
A non-outward thing. Lately what it has been is like dancing. Just like having, that is an outward expression though, but like it's more about how I feel in my body and feeling like a comfort moving inside my body in a way that I didn't always feel comfortable. That was the first thing that came to mind, but I'm like, that's kind of outward. But it is more of like this expression, I suppose, like the activity of it. It has nothing to do with anyone else who may be in the space with me. It's more about like a comfort that I feel in my body to allow it to move in a way that maybe felt awkward before because I wasn't sure how my body was supposed to move. And so it always felt like really forced trying to make it conform or move a certain way that was gendered. That I'm like, does it look too femme? Does it look too butch? Does it look too this or, to other people? And now I feel like when I'm in my own space, I just sometimes want to move in a way that I feel free to move without judging myself for how it might look too gendered or too awkward or whatever that word is, whatever that feeling might be.
I feel like the thing is the saying dance like no one is watching.
That's it. So can I express my gender in dance?
I mean, I think it's beautiful. I mean, it may be an outward thing, but it's still something that starts in the mind.
Yeah.
Like our transitions.
Absolutely. Yeah. It is about having that comfort that I have not always had in my skin, and just sometimes it just wants to come out. And also I was raised in a religion where dancing was sinful, and so it's like this rebellion that I do now, even in my own space, and it has become this creative expression for me personally.
Dance to?
I mean, I have like flashbacks of like my gay bar days. I'm just like listening to like a thumping house or.
What was the last thing you danced to?
Probably something from my Spotify playlist that is just like poppy and I don't even know.
You dance to Madonna? Do you dance to Madonna?
Oh yeah, Madonna would be absolutely yes. I do.
Sound system.
I try to release my inner gay boy flair.
So good.
And so
it is good. Inner gay boy flair is top notch.
So I mean, it's funny that I still have to like find words to label it, but it's just really me. It's me.
Okay, give us your best shoulders and arms and hands.
What? And oh yeah, dancing with my hands up and not like constricted.
Yeah. Because you're not trying to cover your chest. It's
exactly. Just like, yeah. I spent years dancing like this.
This is it. This is the dance. That's a no cover chest dance. That's it. We need an acronym because that's too long. So yes. Okay. Is it bio?
I had a chance to dance last night. I spent the weekend helping my friends move, which I mentioned to you in the pre-show. And so we were all wearing masks, but I had a chance to partner dance with one of my friends last night. And it's the first time I'd partner danced with someone who is a similar level of skill as me in like probably 3 to 5 years. It's been a long time. And it was so wonderful. And it might be the first time I've partner danced with someone with that level of skill who's also had top surgery. And so like the physical sensation of it was different because I didn't have a bunch of boobs in the way. I used to be a dance teacher. I used to teach female-bodied people how to lead. I taught a class called Ladies Take the Lead a long time ago. And so it was all about like empowering women to have their voice and speaking up like physically through dance instead of all this power over like people assume men are going to dance. I was such a radical feminist.
I was like building bridges then, holding space. That's amazing.
Yeah. And so like there was this one moment where I switched lead and follow, which is one of my crafty tricks that I do. And so I went from being like this to like this. And then my friend was leading and didn't realize I had done that. And then I was like, tag, you're it. They were like, oh, you got me. It was so funny. And so, I love bringing that like equity and sharing and like taking turns even into movement and dance together. And there is so much joy in having a body that feels right and being able to move in it and feel alive. So I love that dance was your answer, Aaron, because I'm also really a dancer in spirit. My calves are still really sore.
I used to dance a lot like in my 20s when Prince had a nightclub here and it was called Glam Slam. And so we would get into my friends and I would get in for free because we'd be able to get up on stage and dance. And then like, that was a lot of fun. And then sometimes we would get passes to go upstairs to Erotic City and just dance some more and dance until like, we'd start dancing at like 10:30 at night and be done dancing at like 6 o'clock in the morning and just be in one location. And it was a lot of fun. So yeah.
Been a while though, huh? Since those
I
days.
mean, I went to go see the 20th anniversary of the Teaches of Peaches, and my friend Shannon Blowtorch was spinning,
Cool.
and I realized I have to keep going to Shannon's shows because Shannon has puts on shows, dance parties too, and I'm like, you have to go and see more of these shows because I was just leaning up against the partition because I was right up against the stage, and I was just like moving my neck, and I was like, throw down, but I just don't know what to do with myself. So yes, but
Uh,
yeah, I need to go back out dancing. I'm trying to put that on my calendar now. So
Yay.
yes.
It's so
Is
good.
it is it is it that time?
Well, it is. We're going to take our break, everyone. So we'll be back in a little couple minutes here and enjoy the break.
Hey, this is Jacko from Stealth, the Transmasculine Podcast. Check out our show, which focuses on the stories of trans men who transitioned before or around the year 2000. Come listen to Jason, who transitioned in 1968, or Jude, who's turning 83 this year. Listen to men of color share their experiences of transitioning into their authentic selves. You can find us on iHeartRadio, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and other streaming platforms, or on our website, transmasculinepodcast.com.
All right, everyone, we are back. So Atlas had to step away just for a few minutes to handle some business, and Aaron and I are going to keep going with our conversation today. So Aaron, you have a number of websites, and I'll drop the whole pile of them in the chat right now so folks can take a look. But I wonder if we could spend a little bit of time talking about what the sort of aim and audience is for each one, so we can like get our minds wrapped around just the body of work that you
my
like
threads.
are ongoing creating. So why don't we start with Trans Manifesto? What is the aim and the audience of Trans Manifesto?
Trans Manifesto is really the next iteration of Genderful in some ways because it's sort of where it's the outlet for my own personal expression of my transitional journey. And I feel like it is more personal, I feel like, than Genderful was, because Genderful was more about creating a platform for a lot of voices. And Trans Manifesto in some ways feels uniquely mine. It feels like my story. It's a space where I'm sort of able to write, and it may evolve to telling the story, to telling my story in other ways. But right now, it is really just a blog where I write about, and unfortunately, it is currently down. I'm hoping that it will be back up by the end of the day. I have some technical issues with that site right now, but it holds my personal writings, and I have it sort of divided into a blog that is sort of more about topical things that come up and may trigger me, and I feel like I have to write about them. And then I have another section that is really just my story, and where I am writing about my experience growing up as a trans person. And so I feel like it's also sort of a continuation. The very first website I built many moons ago was called The Butchelor, BTCHELOR.com, and it's still out there. It's still live. It's really outdated. So I've been pulling that old content, which was pre-transition. It was pre a lot of things that I wrote in that blog, but it was a great outlet for me at the time. And so I feel like Trans Manifesto is sort of a continuation of that. In some ways, I feel like it is my story captured for other trans people to just see my version of my story, and also for people that I know who maybe don't understand, or still understanding, who are still learning, and it's giving them a peek into one trans person's experience. And it may evolve into something bigger, but when I first started it, I really just wanted an outlet to be able to capture my story. And right now, it's just the box that I'm putting my story in. And so it is personal, but it also, I am intending to extract the lessons, life lessons, creative lessons that I have learned for myself. And it's a place that I can put them out into the world. So it's the lessons that I've extracted through this such a unique experience of transition. I feel like it's given me insights into myself, into gender as a whole. Obviously, a lot of things we've talked about around spirituality. I have this whole new perspective. And so it's just an outlet for me to be able to find language so that I can talk about it. And in a hopefully a better, more concise, clear way. So that's sort of what Trans Manifesto is. It's really personal, and it's really just an outlet for my own creative expression, so that I can capture my story and share any nuggets of insight that I've gleaned from the experience, this highly special, magical experience of transition. So yeah. And it may evolve too, because I do feel like there's still an aspect of the gender side. That gender thread wants to be woven into the other sites. And I feel like I'm still figuring out what that bridge looks like between Trans Manifesto and some of my other work on these other websites. So that's, right now it still feels really compartmentalized and separate. And that's why I have all these sites, because these threads have been really separate for so long. And I feel like I'm still learning to weave them together in a way that makes sense to myself and to other people. So
so what's the aim and the audience for wild creating and rewilding creativity, and why are there two of those?
They may become, it's sort of a technical experiment, honestly, about the wild creating. I built to be about the conversations, because I feel like there's an aspect of conversation that Genderful was supposed to be, that now I think wild creating is about building community and conversations about some of these threads. And specifically, I'm wanting to create creative tools and frameworks to help people create things. And for a long time, since quitting my corporate job, I have been helping a lot of heart-based entrepreneurs, artists, healers of various sorts build their personal brands and their digital platforms, and which in some ways has felt somewhat limiting, because now I'm wanting to create tools for creators, for all creators, and especially for more queer and trans creators who maybe don't feel creative, who maybe have never thought of themselves as artists or creators. I feel like I really want to empower more people to tell their stories, to tell their unique stories. Like I'm telling my story on Trans Manifesto. I want to empower other people to do the same thing with creative tools and techniques and frameworks. Just as someone who's been creating things for a really long time and creating for other people. So I'm building wild creating as sort of right now it's just it's a space I've created to hold space. I'm kind of building the framework. It's just an empty shell right now, but I'm going to be filling it with conversations and community. And then the rewilding creativity part. And again, this is sort of an experiment as having them as two separate websites. They may end up becoming one, but it's going to be more about having tools and courses and classes and resources that people can use to claim that creative title and actually create from the heart, from the ideas that they have coming from within themselves, listening and trusting yourself about that process of finding your own inner voice and your own creative process. And I feel like that is a lot of what that work is about, is empowering the creative process in others and giving them some of the tools that have worked for me as a creative professional for many years, and then also as someone who's just really wanting to share my story. And I feel like the more of us who are sharing our stories, our stories just create points of connection for people. And it's like those little bridges that we can build. And I feel like the more I can empower other people to create and get their voices out there, and help people see themselves as creative and as creators, as artists, just your story, just your voice makes you an artist, because you have a unique perspective that no one else has. And if I can empower more people to actually take action on those inner creative urges, and go ahead and just take little baby micro steps they don't have to be big steps. I mean, I've built all of this over years. It's not like I just, and creativity is a process too. It's not something that
Yeah.
you just decide one day that you're going to do it and it's complete. There is a process to creating something new. And I feel like that's what the world wants right now is a lot of new things. And in order to have new things, we have to have creative people who are empowered to share their ideas and to share their
Mhm.
voice and to actually put something new out into the world. And sometimes it doesn't work the first time. Like this right now, I'm experimenting with rewilding creativity, with wild creating. I'm not,
Mhm.
it's the fuzziest of all my ideas because it's the newest. So it's still sort of a baby seedling. I see the creative process also. I mean, our ideas are like little seeds that we have to nurture. And I feel like that's
Yeah.
where the wild part of creating is. It is like this garden, and this is a garden where I'm growing new ideas that will hopefully help other people grow their own ideas. So that's really
Yeah.
what wild creating and rewilding creativity. There's sort of bookend sites right now that may end up becoming something else, but for now, it's about creating tools and frameworks that will empower other people to create something new and
Yeah.
improved in the world. So
I love that. I love that, like, so much of it seems like a value of yours that I see coming through in all of your work is this desire to empower others to tell their story
yes,
in whatever way that means, right? If it's like using Genderful as a platform, if that's giving people tools and skill sets to do that, if that's just sort of the encouragement to get out there and share your story. Like
yeah,
there's all these ways that I see you like wanting to spend your life energy not only expressing yourself, but creating room and spaces and opportunities for others to express themselves as well.
yes.
And I think that's a really powerful value that I share. Like
I
that's
see it. I see it in
you
you.
know that's what I'm about.
I see it. It shines bright. I can definitely see that in the work you're doing, and I love it. I'm inspired. I'm so inspired by how you use technology, and I mean, I've had like new ideas just since connecting with you. I'm like, man, they were really using technology to its full extent, and so it's really inspired me to think about how I'm using technology and new tools that I may want to start
Mhm.
experimenting with. So,
Yeah,
yeah, I
I
definitely
love
see
that.
that similar value in what you're creating. So, um, yeah, and it's definitely, and I feel like it's because my voice was muted for so long. I hid my voice
Mhm.
for so long. So now
Mhm.
I'm nurturing it in myself, and then hopefully creating these spaces to help other people nurture it um, themselves. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
So speaking of you, what is the audience and the aim of aaronembry.com and how is that different from your other websites?
Yeah, I think it existed before the others, and
Sure.
it historically has been where I promoted myself professionally as like a graphic designer, a photographer who's worked, um, in-house for big companies and for agencies. And it was always sort of my professional website. It's where my work lived as a designer for other people or as a photographer for other people. It's where I posted my portfolio. And
Mm.
there's still some of that on there because it's definitely sort of in transition. And that's why I created that new subdomain for design, because I'm starting to talk about um, design. I'm wanting to shift more away from doing design on demand for other people and helping people become designers themselves. So I'm teaching design courses. I'm teaching about human design and how people might want to leverage human design in their work. And so uh, Aaron Embrey still feels very much about my professional work in the world, like where I charge money to do services for other people. And it feels very
Hmm.
much about the transactional part of the work that I'm doing. It feels very much like my go to work hat is at Aaron
Yeah,
Embrey,
totally.
and all the things that all the offers that I'm creating for people to purchase live there. Whereas Trans Manifesto and Wild Creating and Rewilding Creativity are all about like I'm just putting value out, um, hopefully in a way that is accessible and free and
Yeah.
um, but I also still have to make money. So that's definitely about where I make money and the services that I still provide for others. And I still do design work and I still do freelance photography and so all of that stuff still lives in that world. And I'm learning how to like weave the Trans Manifesto into Aaron Embrey um, and into Wild Creating. I do feel like Trans Manifesto and Wild Creating, those sites will come together. I see it more clearly there than I do for Aaron Embrey. And so, this is my experiment too, is figuring out how to weave these different threads of my work together.
Yeah.
So yeah, but Aaron Embrey and the design aspect of Aaron Embrey, that's definitely about how I make a living. uh,
Yeah.
and for now, and that's expanding too. And I'm starting to think about that differently too. I'm not just thinking about trading my time for money the way I have for so long. And I'm really shifting more towards creating more content that is of value. And I have created space. I'm, dipping a toe into Patreon. I have this whole vision for like creating Aaron's zines about things where all of this content will be going into those zines in a Patreon that may be like a lower price point way of interacting with my work, but still a paid resource. I feel like we're all getting creative in how we're sharing our value and claiming the value that we're owed in our work, in our emotional labor, and our physical labor, and our creative labor, and spiritual labor. And so I'm navigating what is something that I feel the need to get paid for, and what is something that needs to just be accessible and available. And I'm navigating all of that through these sites, and it's kind of my playground right now. So. Yeah.
I have to figure out also in an ongoing way how to balance that, like creating resources or material that has value and also paying for fact of life issues. Like everybody has to pay for food, clothing, housing,
Right.
and those sort of just basic meds, right? Those basic things.
Right.
At least until we get universal basic income. Hey.
Yeah. Let's create that.
Yeah.
Yeah. It is a juggle.
And so one of the things that I have sort of opted to do is offer what I can as pay what you want. So it's free to those who need it. And like this show is free to access. You don't have to pay money. It's not paywalled, any of that stuff. But if people enjoy what we're up to, they can support us on Patreon. They can like go to my Ko-Fi and drop some money, or my PayPal, or whatever. I actually have a little daydream about getting sponsors for the show so that I can offer honorariums to all the talk show guests. Wouldn't it be great if I could like give each guest $25 for their time, which maybe isn't like an hour for hour, but it's still something instead of nothing.
Right.
I mean, $100 or $1,000 would be even better, but I feel like I need to start reasonable and work up to that.
Sure. Yeah, it can always grow into something amazing, but yeah, it is this process of navigating like those little points of trying to categorize it. And it's all valuable, of course, and I love that idea of paying what you can. And I feel like I see more and more creators moving to that model, because you're still valuing your work. You're acknowledging the fact that it does have value. I mean, it does, whether it's a commodity or not, does not remove its value. It is such a tricky thing, especially as creative people, to like monetize certain aspects of the creative process, but then not wanting to limit the value that is there, that I want to freely share. I wish I could freely share everything. And maybe we will get to that point where we can do that. But it is a juggle of navigating that process of valuing what we're creating, and but seeing its value either way and knowing that it has value.
Yeah. So you might have touched on it, but what does your next personal or professional transition look like right now?
Yeah, I'm definitely amidst it. It is this stepping away from from being a service provider, of thinking myself only as this provider of a creative service,
Mm,
and sort of owning my creative expertise. And I feel like that is a definite shift in like thinking, from somebody who's only helping other people create their things, to valuing the ideas that I have, and
mm,
feeling confident in putting those ideas out there. Um, but I also feel like I still have one foot in this world of being a service provider, where I still have clients who are relying on me to help them create their businesses. And I still enjoy doing that, but I'm also trying to create more space for my own ideas, and to let uh, those have as much value as the time and energy that I was putting into helping other people build their ideas.
mm-hmm.
It's giving myself at least a small bit of that time and energy for my own ideas. And I think that's the shift that's happening now, is taking one foot out of um, my service-based business, and putting it and investing in myself and my own ideas, and giving those ideas time and space that I haven't always prioritized. So
Mm-hmm.
that is definitely the transition that's happening right now, is me feeling confident enough to put my own ideas out there, and to trust that this is the next iteration of my work, and not doubt, because I have a lot of doubt that comes up because to embrace something new, you have to let go of something old. I can't keep
Yeah.
holding on to those old ways that I've been working and also create this new thing at the same time. Like, I have to let go
Mm-hmm.
of something that is old to make room for something new. And
Yeah.
so that's definitely what's happening in my work right now, is so that I can focus more on Trans Manifesto and on these wild sites that are more about the ideas that I have that might help people. But I'm not going to let go of Aaron Embrey yet, in terms of, or it may become something totally. It may be the container for everything eventually, and um, yeah, yeah, it's definitely. I'm still in transition in every sense of the word,
Yeah.
perpetually.
I feel like, I don't know, I feel like transitioned past tense is not really a word.
No, no, it's not for me.
Like, I don't know, maybe it is technically or grammatically, but in my brain, it's like, no, it's kind of an ongoing evolution. It's an
Yeah,
ongoing process.
for me, it has been for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Aaron, what do you believe is the spiritual reason that trans, non binary, and gender diverse people were created or evolved like along the way?
I do see these bridges being built by trans and non-binary people being able to uh, sit in both of these spaces, in that sort of like in between, and bridge that conversation. Um, and I do feel like it is this sort of outward expression of these inner experiences that we all have of gender, but we don't have the language for. We don't. It's just this brand new way of thinking about ourselves that I feel like trans people, non-binary people are able to outwardly embody these experiences that we all have internally that we don't necessarily have labels for. And so I do see the whole experience of the fact that there is this great abundance of trans people who are finding their voices, who are creating new things, and are bridging these binaries in new ways, in creative ways, um, because it had to happen. Like, it is this sacred alchemy that we have this great privilege of experiencing, and I think there are so many gifts in that experience that we as a community are bringing to the world, are gifting to the world through our unique perspectives. And I don't know the big reason, but I know that there is like this healing that has to happen between these polarizing boxes and I'm not just speaking about gender. I feel like there's a lot of polarized
Mm,
energy that, to me, it feels like trans people are like this balm for, like, the things that that we're creating as a community and the conversations that we're creating. And hopefully, it's a way, as more people are having these conversations, as more people are sharing their stories, it is more and more connection points that people can connect to who may not understand all of it. I think about my own life. I have people in my life who don't understand all of my story, but there might be an aspect of it they understand. So they connect to part of it. And so I think we're creating these connection points, and definitely shifting the conversation in different ways that are helping people, I hope, see that the trans experience is divine. It is a sacred experience, and it is not, a bad thing that is happening to us. I feel like it is an opportunity that we are all having, trans or not, non-binary or not, to sort of adopt an expanded view on what's possible. And, we're a beautifully diverse community. And so I think it's a great opportunity for trans people to be seen in a more holistic way, maybe that is not so limiting and confined and closeted. I don't know if that answered. That's a very hard question in
It
some
is.
ways, but
We save the hard ones for last.
yeah, that was a hard one. But I do feel like there is a special purpose, I feel like, for trans people to exist right now, and it is
Yeah.
about bridging these binaries, and it does seem to be very spiritual. I see that thread throughout the community, that there is like a depth of the conversation, because it's not black and white, is it? It is more beautifully complex than that. But it's also, like Atlas said, very simple when we just forget about the exterior and see ourselves as just, human souls.
Yeah,
All of us.
totally. I have a question from chat from my wonderful friend Kamesy. And it's sort of half rhetorical. So I'm actually just going to sort of read you our like back and forth trying to figure out how to ask the question, and maybe we can stumble into it together. So a moment ago we were talking about like transitioned, ED at the end. And so Kimsey wrote in the chat, does transitioning ever really finalize? And then Juice said, it's a journey. And I said, mood. And then I was like, wait, is that a question for Aaron or just a rhetorical comment? And Kimsey said, a little bit of both. If there are any thoughts Aaron has, I'd love to hear them. And then Kimsey added, because at what point in one's transition does the process feel settled? Is there a need or a desire to have things settle? And then I said, maybe how to feel settled or comfy on the journey. And we're like, maybe. Kimsey said, this may be a very cis-focused question, though, so feel free to disregard outside of the rhetorical aspect. But I do think there's value to talk about, like, either like feeling settled while still in transition, right? Like going from the initial, like, fear, anxiety, or terror. Like if I look at my early VODs or my early like journals, vlogs of starting tea and how scared I was, and like, what if I can't figure out how to sing? What if my hair falls out? Like, what if I grow all this other hair that I don't want? Whatever. Like, if I look at all of that, and then I think about how, even though, like for me, I'm still not medically done, I'm on my way, but I'm not there yet. Feeling settled while still being on the journey, and how do you get from that initial like maybe paralyzing fear to jump off the diving board to like feeling okay in the process. Here's another comment from Keemsy. Oh, if I may, as a cis person, engaging with trans and non-binary people has really helped me understand my womanhood and find, everyone's saying words, peace not only in wanting to be a woman, but that I am not fixed to what society values in womanhood.
Yeah. And that comment actually likens back to when I think about what we were talking about, the purpose of why trans people exist or were created. And maybe it's about helping people find that comfort in their own gender, whatever it is, and understanding gender on that deeper level. Because I do feel it's funny when I think back to my early pre-transition pre-medical, pre-social transition days, when I was really thinking about like moving along this binary spectrum, and I thought about like hypermasculinity over here and hyperfemininity over here, and I always placed myself like square, pretty much in the middle, but masculine leaning always.
Mm-hmm.
But if I thought, okay, if male and female are the terms that like divide where I am, I really initially just thought I'm going to step just to the other side, but I'll still sort of be in the middle between masculine and feminine, but I will just be outwardly more masculine. But then as I continued my transition, I was like, well, I know when I'm finished, when I look masculine enough for what feels like, is that what transition will mean for me? Is like, I will get to a point where I'm like, there, that's it. And it sort of felt that way because I started so slowly in my physical medical transition that I felt like I was just easing into it. I didn't, it felt like it took a while before I could recognize myself. And I felt like that's when I would know that I was finished, as I would recognize myself. And that sort of did happen, but it felt like it kept moving out. Like as I moved closer to what I thought was me, outwardly, accurately expressed, like I kept moving because I was still exploring, I guess. And so it became this sort of path of finding comfort. It was like those two lines when you're like trying to line them up and one's moving, you're moving towards it, but maybe it's moving too, and you're like, that's close enough. And you're like, and so I feel like that's what my transition experience has been like, finding like where my inner picture meets my outward expression is like trying to find that meeting point of and so but I do feel like that has changed as I have transitioned, as I found more comfort in my femininity after transitioning. Like, I feel like I knew I was never going to be hyper either. I was never going to be hyper masculine. I definitely don't identify. I definitely identify as trans male, trans masculine, but I embrace the trans part of that because that has been my experience. And I had 34 years of a different identity because of that perspective that I had then. I had those labels that I was really thought those were the only labels that were possible. So I embraced them as best I could. Things like butch, lesbian, I wore those labels, but they were just stepping stones for sure. And I feel like I'm still stepping, but I feel a whole lot less rigid in terms of where I'm not trying to get to any particular place anymore. I'm just sort of like okay with being in between in a way that I wasn't before. And sort of embracing the in-betweenness of my gender, of that fluidity, of how I perceive that within myself. Yeah, I don't know. I went from a place of sort of feeling in between to another place of sort of feeling in between, but much more comfortably in between.
Yeah.
So that's my transition, is being really awkwardly in between to being really comfortably in between.
I love that.
So
I genuinely love that. I think that gets back to some of the earlier conversation we're having about edge walking.
yes,
Right.
it feels like
enjoying that, the yes and the between and the
right.
multiple citizenships concurrently.
Yes. I think I hated that about myself for a long time. Like I hated that yes and. Like I hated that I felt both or neither, and it really created that discomfort, that dysphoria. And then as I started embracing more parts of me, instead of resisting those parts, I started embracing those parts, all of those parts, then I can accept my in-betweenness in a more comfortable way, for sure. Or that edge feels not as sharp as it once did, maybe. Yeah.
James writing in the chat. So chasing peace, not really chasing transition, or maybe rather passing.
So true.
To which I say yes, but I also added, or letting peace descend. Because there could be this like actively pursuing it And I feel like, especially with regards to maybe physical transition, there is a certain amount of active pursuit. Like you
Right.
have to schedule your appointments, you have to get your letters, you have to make those, like go to get your people together to have your surgeries. You have to show up on the day of your surgery. You
Right.
know, you have
It,
to
it is a creative
do all the
process.
paperwork to change the stuff. It is. And you get
It
to name
is.
yourself if you want. Like it's fun.
Yes, it is. And I think remembering, and it has been, I'm a few years removed now from the intensity of that process when
Yeah.
I was first getting started. So I've been,
Yeah.
I started my physical social transition in 2010. So, I'm a few years removed from the intensity of all those active decision points or, taking action points of
Mhm.
actually taking steps. The steps I'm taking now, I do still have to show up for my appointments and do my blood work, and because I am still, HRT is very much still part of my. I'm still mostly testosterone based being now, but I have played with hormones and like what feels comfortable, and so now I feel like
Yeah.
I'm just sort of fine tuning like. So
Yeah.
my transition is like, do I need to be on 0.5 milligrams of whatever it is a week? Like, is that too
Mhm.
much? Like, and so it's been about refining that balance of hormones for me, and realizing, it was never my goal to be like hyper masculine, but
Yeah.
I do greatly feel more at home in a masculine outward appearance, but I find other ways to embrace my feminine energy. It doesn't have to be outwardly expressed
Yeah.
in a way that, so I don't know, my whole idea of transition has shifted now. 13 years in, um, I do feel like it's more about, it is about allowing peace to descend. I like that for sure, and less about, um, uh, yeah, I do bump up against the other side because I spent so many years like being angry when I would be out with friends and they would be like, "Hello, ladies," and I would have that, you know, cringe of being like blindly
Uh,
grouped. And now I find that now, like, have that same discomfort with being blindly grouped in the masculine, like I'm like that. It's not as cringe, but I still feel like you're still not seeing all of me. And so,
mhm.
like, part of now is like, how am I? How can all of me be seen outwardly? And I just don't know what that looks like. And maybe that's the transition I'm on right now, is um, finding new ways to be seen.
Yeah. Oh, what a wonderful conversation we're having. Um,
Been fun.
so I have my three concluding questions. These are sort of the ones that, you know, if people haven't seen this whole interview, maybe they'll see little clips of this part at the very end. So even if you've already kind of said it, if you feel like reiterating, feel free. But is there anything that we missed about your perspective on gender, spirituality, and creativity that you'd like to make sure that you get to say today?
It feels like we had a great conversation today. I've really enjoyed it. And it has been great to be able to sort of speak about these three threads that are very present in my life
Mm,
and that have always felt very separate. And I feel like that has been the most important, like the thing I value most from this conversation is being able to speak about these things all together in one space
yeah,
and feeling
yeah,
like they can exist together. I can be a spiritual trans person who is also creative, and
yeah,
I can be more creative because I am a spiritual trans person. I can be more
yeah,
spiritual because I'm a creative trans person. I can be more, you know, it's about, um, it really is about finding that holistic sense of peace and having all of these discordant parts and all these fragmented parts of myself that
yeah.
didn't feel like they worked together for so long to be able to coexist in the same space. And it's been great to be able to kind of have that experience. So thank you for that.
Oh, you're totally welcome. I love being intersectional about all these pieces. It's powerful to me.
Me too.
Um, okay, can you share an experience with gender euphoria? So a time that you felt you're really just feeling yourself. Like I like to put a little happiness at the end of these interviews.
Absolutely. I have so much more gender euphoria now
Mm.
that I am able to that I don't feel like I'm pushing all the parts away. And again, I feel like dancing came back to me immediately because
Mhm.
I feel like that was something that was always felt so gendered to me in my mind, and it felt forbidden, and it felt like, and now it is such this joy that I feel like I can move in this body, even if it is weird and awkward on the outside. It feels so euphoric on the inside because I feel like I'm not trying to move from any one box, that I'm just feeling free to be myself. And yeah, um, and I I feel gender euphoria also in all of these things that I am creating. The fact that I can bring gender into the work that I'm doing now, or I feel more able to include it in the conversation in my professional work. Um, that provides a certain level of gender euphoria.
Mhm.
And yeah, seeing my friends and feeling like I can be myself in this body and be seen in this body, um, and I can speak my truth and be seen. That is always euphoric. And yeah, this time and space has been a feeling of euphoria. Um, and I got a new bike. I got my bike fixed, and so that has been like me on my little BMX
Yay.
bike. So I've been riding that bike, and that I do
Mhm.
feel like this is me being free like a kid again. Like the gender I
Mm.
felt as a kid that was so free to just be, and so
Yeah,
I get that moment riding my bike. So
I love that too. It's
yeah,
wonderful.
it's good.
So this is the soapbox question. If you only had like 30 seconds to get your opinion expressed out to the world, what would you want to make sure that folks know about your perspective on gender and non-binary or trans issues?
I'm going to circle it back. The first thing that I feel that I want to say is that we can be both. We can be spiritual beings
Mhm.
and we can be transgender. And I feel like this is something that my existence wants to prove, the existence of trans
Mm.
people. And
Mhm.
that because certain belief systems may make it feel impossible for our existence to be true, uh, I'm hoping that more people who are sharing their stories, the more people who are creating these kind of conversations for connection points for people to be able to connect with, that people will realize that trans people are valid, trans people exist,
Mhm.
and that it is a certain sacred experience um, that can exist side by side with having spiritual beliefs. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, I feel like that is the big thing that my heart is wanting to say, and wanting people to connect with in some way, and that your voice matters. And I feel like the more people the more queer and trans people who can use their voice to share their stories, and I feel like it's just going to create more connection points for, even if people don't understand the totality of you, they may understand part of you, and that will be a little doorway that will open. It'll be a little crack that will let some light in, and hopefully expand the understanding that people who do not understand will gain a greater understanding, or you know, a greater understanding, I think, of things that they don't understand.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for being on the show today, Aaron. Chat for the last 20 years or more. Aaron has helped create new things for big companies and corporations. And now he's a real human being helping to create and change things, follow his bliss, and make more of his own new things. You can check out aaronembrey.com, transmanifesto.com once it's back up. Hopefully before this even launches on Friday, from the live recording to the recorded recording. Um, you can also check out rewildingcreativity.com, wildcreating.com, design.aaronembrey.com, and photos.aaronembrey.com. We do have our Clouder query for you all. Has your religion or spirituality changed or evolved since you realized you weren't cishet? tell us all about it on our socials. We'll be posting that shortly. And so in terms of coming soon, next week, our guest is Faye, who uses she and they pronouns. We're going to be discussing plurality, being a neko, and queer anime. So if you want to talk about the intersections of all of those wonderful nerdy fandoms and hear from a trans cat girl or trans cat girls, plural, come on back next week for that episode. So far as community updates, I want to wish everyone a very happy Autism Awesome Month. They call it Awareness Month, but I'm pretty aware of autism. So I feel like, acceptance is like, yeah, that's a good step. But I think awesome or action or awe, maybe just awe, Autism Awe Month, like, wow, autistic people have such powerful minds that can do such cool things. Anyways, it's that month right now. So we want to wish everyone a very happy Autism Awesome Month. You're going to start calling it Autism Awesome Month. Yes. From me, a fellow autist. Get it? Autist. Haha, we're funny. Anyways, so that's it. That's the show. I'm going to play the outro. Thank you, Aaron, again for being on the show. Thanks to Atlas, who had to wander off, and to Sweet Neferkitty, who took a nap for the whole show and is now cleaning her paw. So cute. Trans rights are human rights. That's right. Have a good one, everyone. Genderful would like to thank our guest for being on this podcast. If you'd like to catch us live, join us on Mondays at twitch.tv/GenderMeowster. Show notes will appear in the edited version of the show on Fridays on both YouTube and podcasting platforms.
If you have a question you would like the host to answer or are gender diverse and would like to request an interview, please send an email to genderfulpodcast@gmail.com or sign up via the website at genderfulpodcast.com.
As a gender diverse community, the Clatter wants to assure our listeners that we are prepared to moderate our spaces. We will get positive and negative feedback on these shows and topics, and we have a moderation team on our channels, socials, and Discord server ready to deal with this.
Please join our Discord server at discord.gg/Meowster to meet the community and get a regular digest of solidarity resources. You can also support us with subscriptions on Patreon, following and reviewing us on your favorite podcasting platform, or engaging with our posts and content on social media at GenderfulPod and at GenderMeowster.
You could take a few moments to also rate the show. We will post any 5-star reviews on our socials, so get creative. Mention a special interest of your own, a project you're working on, or even say hi to your comfort person in your review. What power!
This show is made possible by volunteers, tips, and subscriptions. Shout out to the folks helping us coordinate guests, edit the podcast, moderate the live chat, and post on our socials.
Artist credit for Genderful. Genderful's theme song is called Hope by Free Range Megs, aka Soma. The GenderMeowster logo was designed by That's Barnaby and edited with consent by Transgriffin. Genderful's pre-show is wrangled by JuiceTex. Genderful is edited and mixed by Transgriffin and Alexis Vandam. Genderful's social media is managed by Queer to Help. Genderful is hosted by Atlas O Phoenix and GenderMeowster. Genderful is the intellectual property of GenderMeowster. All rights reserved.
Trans rights are human rights. That's right.